The meeting of the Ipswich and East Suffolk CCG governing body. My name is Mark Shenton, the chair of the governing body, and I would like to welcome you all to the agenda that we have for you today. At our last meeting in November, we had a discussion or a statement, I suppose, about the impact of the workforce and deprivation, and as a request that if there were two priorities that we could work on for the future, workforce and deprivation would be two that we would very much welcome an opportunity to manage in a much better way. And we know the impact of COVID on our workforce has seen depletion. We know that we have a workforce that requires boosting, and we know that COVID has caused a lot of burnout for a lot of our practitioners and managing support, those who manage support of those practitioners. And we also have seen the impact of deprivation as a driver of need and demand as a consequence, and inequalities associated with deprivation, showing how an infectious pandemic can make outcomes rapidly worse for those suffering those inequalities. And since then, we've had Omicron variant wave, that wave come through our communities across the UK, and we've seen how that wave has added to the challenges that we were recognising before this most significant wave of COVID-19, and seeing firsthand the issues of burnout and the challenge to keep all public services of all nature, not just health and care, open, because they provide essential things to our way of life. And the consequence is really reinforcing why, particularly in my view, the issues of workforce and deprivation still have to stay as the top two priorities. And on the back of that, I want to congratulate and thank all of our public sector workers for the commitment they've shown since the end of November when we last met. The booster vaccination programme that we've seen, where it felt like we were going to be asking people to really drag themselves out to support this, but actually the wave of support that we had for it was amazing. And I really want to thank everyone, from volunteers all the way through to those going more than the extra mile to service that particular programme. But we've also seen it in every other sector, in our reports through the tactical programme, where we keep an eye on what's happening and what might we have to do. We've seen little in the way of closure of services and being able to keep the whole show on the road despite the challenges that we've had. So I really still continue to implore that that workforce and deprivation remain our top two priorities for the future. And we know that since we last met, we're potentially on the brink of 70 or 80,000 NHS workers losing their jobs. And how are we going to respond to that, and how are we going to ensure that public safety, but also the consequence of loss of jobs and the impact on public safety is managed in a way that keeps that safety at the very top end of our thoughts? And in terms of deprivation, I'm not sure that I've seen convincing plans from the top come through or be really displayed. I'm concerned that the most plans I've seen are about how people being deprived of their power is taking precedent over deprivation of people's lives, and that is of no interest to me. So I look forward to continue working with you on those real priorities for the future, and hope that we can really make an impact for the future of our population and for our workforce, who deserve the right to live and work to the top of their game. Thank you. Jo, do we have any apologies for absence?
Only from Badri.
From Badri, okay, thank you. In which case we'll go on to any declarations of interest, any hospitality or gifts that people have received over and above that which we have already publicly declared. Is there anything that anyone wishes to raise? I don't see any hands, in which case we'll go to the minutes of the previous meeting of the governing body. Does anyone have any issues that they wish to raise about the minutes? Paul?
Yeah, apologies, Chair. Page 10, I think fourth bullet point down, states that there was no 104-week waits. That's inaccurate. There were some 104-week waits. So offline, I'll make sure we have the proper wording in a minute.
Thank you for that. Anything else? In which case, if we go on to the action log, there are 2 actions on there, both of which are closed. They're part of the agenda. Did anyone have anything to add to that? Great. In which case, shall we go to the general update? Ed?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, you've made a number of the comments that I was planning to make, so I won't labour them, but I'd agree. What an extraordinary effort from everyone since we last met. The NHS was put on level 4 incident on the 12th of December, and Paul's going to talk about that later. But the response from the CCG, from all partners in the Alliance, from the ICS, has been extraordinary. Particularly reflected in the vaccination booster campaign, where we went as quick as anyone in the country during December, and within our ICS, Ipswich and East, were the quickest alliance, if I can put it that way. So well done to Maddie and Liz and everyone involved with that incredible rollout. We've kept the system largely at Opal 3 during this phase, which is a significant achievement, when many systems have moved to Opal 4. And as Marcus says, we've kept the show on the road and kept services safe, which is really fantastic, to see. As well as that, we've been keeping momentum on the elective programme, which is crucial, and I'm sure that will absolutely come back to the top of our priorities again as we move out of the national critical incident with any luck. The 2 other things I wanted to say was the move from the closure of the CCGs to the launch of the integrated care boards has been delayed by 3 months to July. So thank you for everyone's patience and forbearance around that delay. Hopefully it'll be the last delay in this timeline. There is work underway to recruit to the new board, and the ambition is to run the board in shadow from April. The final thing I want to say is that we've had a staff survey through, which we're going to look at the first cut of it in part 2, but just wanted to recognise all the work that's gone into that survey. We've seen a significant improvement on our results from the previous year. So very well done to Amanda and all the directors and line managers involved in achieving that improvement. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ed. Any questions for Ed on any of those points that he raised? No, that's fine. We're due to go on to the patient story, but Maddie, I notice Richard Passmore isn't with us as yet. Do you want me to go on to the next item?
Yes, it's okay, and I'll just check.
We're a few minutes ahead. In which case, Lisa, over to you about the patient and public involvement and experience activity report.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. So this paper presents the work that the team have been doing with from October to December 2021 across each Alliance area, programme board, as well as the PALS and complaints function that we have across the 3 CCGs. So I'll just pull out a few examples of the work, and I think the report highlights the amazing achievements with the same number of staff and just working very differently that the team have managed to achieve, although it's still an absolute work in progress. So we still know that we need to keep developing the team and be responsive to the alliances and programme areas. But just some examples. So the team have been working with our Maternity Voices partnership and the maternity team to support the co-production and make sure that pregnant people and families, partners are very much involved and co-producing the maternity and neonatal strategy, which is just out at the moment for our workforce and users feedback to direct the strategy. They have been working on the co-production of the End of Life app to develop the single advanced care pathway record, which is amazing. We've had a huge amount of patient and public experience via the vaccination programme board, which has really helped us to shape some of our responses on the vaccination programme. So that's been incredibly helpful. One of the big areas that the team are working on in the NHS patient safety framework, there is a requirement for each provider and the ICB to develop a patient safety partner network. So these are members of the public who are involved in the oversight of patient safety. So we're just working through with our providers how we can create a collaborative network of patient safety partners rather than having individual patient safety partners that are working in different organisations, actually looking at how we can work with our public to make sure that they see the entirety of the pathway that they will be working with. So that's a really exciting piece of work that's literally just kicked off. We've just started conversations with providers. The engagement platform, which many of you have seen, Let's Talk SNE, went live in October. So we're just taking that quite slowly, but there is an area for each alliance, and we're using it for the maternity co-production events as a platform. So that's really exciting. And then just some of the internal team issues. This quarter we had 528 contacts to PALS, just shows you how busy the team are. The 3 top contact reasons was around vaccination queries, around access into primary care, and around medication issues. We've also seen a significant increase in MP inquiries, and across the 3 months we've had 120 MP inquiries, mainly related to access to booster vaccination and also individual people's vaccination status. And we've had 79 complaints, and that's the area we really want to focus on as a team going forward, to understand not just what the themes are. We know the themes are related to communication, and it tends to be within providers, but actually what's happening and what's the improvement plan related to that. So lots of activity, very small team, that they are kind of getting their fingers in every area. So I'm incredibly pleased, and would just like to thank the team for the massive work that they've done over the last quarter. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Anyone with any questions? I've just got some reflections to share, and yes, absolutely lots of activity going on. The desire to see co-production as a meaningful way in which we can work with patients and the public. You know, we've got to look at, and I look to Fanwell for pointers in this. How do we get the groundswell of opinion coming upwards, not just what is it that we as services feel we want, and actually that in itself is a very supportive approach that boosts that workforce. Yeah, because actually it's an inclusive approach, and patient recording of patient experience is really important, because we don't really understand the quality of outcome unless we understand the patient experience. Quality isn't just about how good an intervention is or how safe it is, it's the experience as well. Fanwell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lisa, for that presentation. Yeah, I'd like to echo the sentiments that you know, a lot of work is going in, you know, particularly given the size of the team. And I think we've seen even from previous reports and the current one that a lot is happening across the system. I think the critical issue is really around not just reflecting the learning that we are getting as a system, but you know, what is it that the people who are participating are getting out of this? You know, particularly, how are we reflecting the change that is coming about, you know, back to the people who have informed us? Because it's one thing for us to, you know, sit here and say, we were informed by patients in the public and we've changed A, B, C, D. But for those people to continue to be engaged, they want to say, I said this, and here is how the system has changed as a result of what I said. So I think it's critical for us to have that sort of feedback loop to say, look at this change that has come about, you know, as a result of what you told us. And given that all these things are happening in different spaces, you will find that, you know, there's part of our system which is very good at providing that feedback. And then another one which just says, we've listened, we'll go away and do what we need to do, but actually not go back to those people who have informed us. So if we can get a system, you know, right across where we feedback and continue to say to people, thank you, we've changed as a result of that. And I think that would be critical. Thank you.
Lisa.
Thank you. So I'll just take Fanwell's point first, because I completely agree. And I think, as you'll remember, Fanwell, when we looked at the strategy development, that was a clear thing that we wanted to achieve from the strategy. How do we close that loop so people aren't just giving us their experience, but are involved in the whole process and see it right round? So I completely agree. And that's something that we will be working on over the next couple of years, because that itself will take a whole culture change across all the work we do. So absolutely agree. And the other point about using insights, so the conversation I was having with the team yesterday is how do we move from a position where we are supporting the programmes with insight into the work they're doing, to actually understanding what the public and our patients are saying and using that to shape the work that we're doing, to start the work that we're doing, and to be that trigger for work. And I think we've had some really good examples with our parent carer networks and forums, and we've had some good examples of how we've done that. But how do we systematically understand through kind of the integrated neighbourhood team level and then wider what the real issues are for the population and use that to stimulate our programmes. And I think, again, that's a big piece of work that is on the agenda for the next couple of years.
And forever after that.
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to maybe also respond to Fanwell and to agree with Fanwell about the importance of responding. I think it's also so important that we're just very honest where it's taken longer to achieve the goal that we're working towards, where maybe it hasn't yet been possible to secure the change that we all collectively want to do. I'm super mindful of the period that we just spoke about in terms of December, and truth be told that we had to just all move to the front line in terms of supporting the vaccination programme, of which we're very pleased to do and pleased with the progress with. But there is honestly a reality that some other pieces of work have had to be put on hold for a period while we do that. And I think one of the most important things is that we do communicate about that. I think it's something the public would accept and have wished us to do. But I think, understandably, we need to share where we have delays and just be very open and honest about the reasons for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie. Any other observations or comments? No. In which case, thank you, Lisa, to the team for their report. It still has a huge amount of interest for us as a governing body, as the importance that this has in how we go about the work that we do, and trying to ensure that as much as possible people are put front and centre of what is trying to be achieved. So we're going to move on to our patient's story, which I suppose is a good segue from the report. And I'd like to welcome back Richard Passmore to the governing body, and thank you for Richard for coming along. 6 months ago, you were good enough to share your experience and the experience of your family and the experience of your wife with the journey that you've been on with dementia as a diagnosis, as a condition, as an impact on the way of life for you and your family. And we committed to bringing you back and looking at how the coordination, the complexity of coordination of services and the impact that we really need to have, what kind of progress were we going to be able to make? And here we are 6 months later. It does seem in some way a very long time, and in other ways a very, very short time. So welcome back, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. Can you see me?
I can now, yes, front and centre.
Splendid, good, because, right. Well, I'm very grateful, Mr. Chairman, governors, ladies and gentlemen, for you honouring your commitment. Until 2 weeks ago, I'd wondered what was happening, and then the telephone rang, and I was very pleased to take the call. I recall that when we spoke last July, at the end of July, I was allotted 25 minutes maximum, but it seems that I stimulated a certain amount of thought and discussion, and Mr. Chairman, you had to end that session just shy of 55 minutes into what we were discussing. So I'm glad that it was something which resonated with you. You'll also recall that I challenged you very directly, and I quote, in inviting me back to outline how dramatic measures have been taken to ensure that situations such as I and my family have had to endure have been consigned to history. And I further commented that we should all be troubled by the abhorrent realities that are bound to be extant for the likes of Mr. and Mrs. Miggins. I further commented that whilst I cannot change what so far has been cast on us, I can only do my best to champion better services and support for others. That remains very much the case. And you'll recall that I characterised Mr. and Mrs. Miggins as pensioners with minimal income, no access to the internet, living in a bucolic setting with poor telephone signals, and they may well have a lack of motor transport. Now, before offering some further observations, I'd like just to repeat a couple of other elements from the paper that I presented last year. And another question that I posed, as you'll recall, was that if you, your other half, your partner, your next of kin, was to receive a diagnosis of any form of dementia, what kind of service and support would you want to receive from the various public bodies, along with the voluntary sector, who are charged with reacting to such a difficult and traumatic diagnosis? Now, please rest assured that in this short statement or short contribution, I'm not going to confine my remarks to a repetition of what I propounded 6 months ago. But let me again highlight the NICE guidelines, NG 97, entitled Dementia, Assessment, Management and Support for People Living with Dementia, along with their carers. And they clearly state that inter alia, support should be tailored to their needs and preferences, provided in a format suitable for them, and available from diagnosis and as required thereafter. It had been my fervent hope that by now, in other words, in the 6 months since I was with you, I would have seen a good amount of energy and indeed some out-of-the-box thinking, which had been applied to activities. I really had hoped that I could see the green shoots of some process in terms of the enhancement of dementia support services in the county, and that further some quick hits would have been agreed, implemented and publicised. And in March last year, as many of you will know, I circulated some thoughts about precisely the kind of quick hits which I felt could be advantageous. These included some work on an initial system that would ensure connection between the likes of primary care, adult services and the charitable sector, so be signposted into a system. And I ventured to suggest that this should be proactive. I suggested that such a system, which is so elementary, needed to be supported by a robust and integrated IT infrastructure. And then I suggested that one of the key elements which is missing is leadership. I described the requirement, as I saw it, for robust and independent leadership, which would have open, direct and full access to all agencies and individuals who have a part to play in improving the situation. You may recall the metaphor I used. I spoke about a captain on the bridge, and I asked where that captain is in the current situation. And it's an unfortunate truth and very regrettable that I have to say that so far as I can see, next to nothing has happened. I'm not aware of any meaningful seeds that have been planted. I appreciate there have been pressures of all kinds, but it's disappointing to have to reflect in this way. I was very pleased to have been invited to be a lay member of the panel that evaluated the bids for the new contract for dementia services. I don't normally mention names, as you know, but I'm very happy to thank Rob Chandler very warmly for his counsel, his guidance, and indeed for his ongoing interaction over the last 6 months. It's been a great pleasure to interact with him. It's also been good news, and I very much welcome the opportunity to have been on the Suffolk Family Carers Partnership Board. Albeit dementia care as such is perhaps only 15% of what the overall care of the overall care that Suffolk Family Carers looks at and has to address. But on the other hand, I'd like to make you aware of the following 6 points. They're in no particular order, but these are matters that I believe, in the spirit of openness, and I was just interested to come in for the last 7 or 8 minutes of the previous discussion. And ho, how splendid. We do need openness. We do need integrity. We do need honesty. We do need communication. But let me just offer the following. At the 11th hour, back in August, I was summarily barred from membership of the Dementia Action Partnership. I resisted being nominated to be a member because I felt that the likelihood was that it would simply be a talking shop. I speak openly, I speak honestly. I was persuaded that, in fact, given the work I've done, that it would be helpful if my life experience and related thinking could be embraced by the partnership. At the 11th hour, I was told that I was not welcome. The manner in which I was told this was utterly remarkable. I could use other adjectives, but this is not the place to use them. I drafted some terms of reference for the Dementia Forum in July last year, and I was advised by the leadership that they would get back to me in the light of the draft I had provided. I'd strongly recommended that as terms of reference, they should be kept simple and that nothing more than a 2-page document would be required. I didn't touch on governance because, ladies and gentlemen, to be honest, I was not really aware of it. It's not something I've worked with. I fully understand why that needs to be included. What emanated is 6 pages, very poorly written, full of spelling mistakes, and I really cannot understand why 45% of a document about terms of reference is about co-production. I simply cannot understand it. Co-production, I think, is a methodology, and perhaps there should be a note about it, but 45% of the text in this document is about co-production. I have made considerable efforts to make contact with a wide range of people. In the period between the 1st of February and the 17th of August last year, I spoke with 49 people individually, and I had some useful feedback from a number. I made the point that I simply had a point of view. I was trying to inject some fresh thinking, and I would be very happy to continue with a process of dialogue and exchange of views. It's very disappointing that a number of people who, if I can use the verb to promise, really did promise to get back to me, and they haven't. Let me give you an example. There are 2 particularly senior people. I'll say no more than that. I'll not identify where they work. But on the 1st of July from one, on the 28th of August from another, I was told that I would be contacted in the light of discussion about and analysis of the material that I'd sent them. I've heard nothing. You will realise that the 1st of July last year is almost 7 months ago. Another matter which is unfortunate is that the complaint that I had to raise with the hospital is still outstanding. I had an email on the 27th of July last year to say that I would have further contact. There has been none. You will recall, because I quoted from the response that I had in the light of the initial complaint that I made, that I really could not accept the answer that I was given because of the gaps in it. And I'm simply seeking to get the gaps filled and explained. I'm not looking for victims. I'm looking for completion in terms of process. Nothing has been forthcoming, and that is a disappointment. Now, for information, and I'm going to touch on continuing healthcare now. My wife received an update and formal evaluation on the 3rd of November last year, to which I was a party, and of course the staff in the specialist unit where she is. They were a party to this. The 3rd of November is 12 weeks ago today. We have heard nothing. There has been no formal response. And I cannot understand how it is possible for such a time to elapse. Why is it that there is not a simple standard operating process that will guarantee a response in, let's say, 4 working weeks or a time frame like that? It really does a disservice to a lot of people who are doing their best. It's administrative and it should be straightforward. We are still waiting. We know what the recommendation was, and from the interaction, the Teams call interview, but we have heard nothing formally. And then last week, it became apparent that the deprivation of living, the so-called DOLS certification for my wife, had not been completed in a timely manner. She will have been in the specialist unit for 12 months on Thursday of this week. I received a telephone call last Thursday evening, fairly late on, and a voice said to me, "Oh, I've just been to see your wife." And he carried on. I thought it was a scam, so I put the telephone down. I then thought about it. I'd taken a note of the number. I called the number back, and I, in fact, was able to understand what was happening. And there is a 12-month deadline. That 12-month deadline is this Thursday. I didn't even know what DOLS was. I had no idea whatsoever. This had never been something which had been within, well, I'd never been notified of it in terms of the literature or anything like that. Now, perhaps that's my mistake. I don't know. Anyhow, I've had about 5 calls since that initial one. My son has also had to be spoken to. It's all happening. For your information, ladies and gentlemen, the last call I had was at 8:30 last night, and hopefully now the process is complete. But again, from an administrative point of view, it beggars belief that something so important, so legally essential, so binding as this can happen in such an unfortunate manner. And then there's one other point that I'd like to make, and forgive me if this is not necessarily the form or the format or the environment in which I should ask this. However, in the work that I've been doing, a consistent element has been the absence of contribution to this essential thinking by primary care. And whenever I've raised it to say, where is the doctor's input? Who is the representative? Who is in charge of the doctors in Suffolk? Who is their spokesperson? I get shouted down. I raised this at the Dementia Forum last week, and the response that I received was very unfortunate. Now, I might sound like a crack record on this one, and perhaps this is one for you, Mr. Chair, given your background, both in terms professionally and also your academic post now. The truth is that without the jigsaw piece, which is labelled primary care, the jigsaw cannot be completed. And it's absolutely vital that there is representation, contribution from, creative thinking, et al., from primary care. So even if this is the wrong forum to raise that issue, please forgive me. I feel strongly that it must be addressed. It's a missing link in an essential chain. Now, there are 7 points there, and of course, none of those, as far as I can see, are very positive. The fact remains, however, that my involvement, my engagement, since this all kicked off, has been, still is, and will remain to try and effect positive influence. You may recall, and I'm about to conclude, that I really highlighted the need for the lowest common denominator to apply. I spoke, and I'm not pejorative when I say this, I spoke about the difficulties of the Mr. and Mrs. Migginses of this world, who I've mentioned a short while ago. It is absolutely wrong that people like them are just left out to fend for themselves, bereft of help, with no engagement from and proactive support from the powers that be. You'll also remember that I quoted from a book by Atul Gawande. And I said, culture has tremendous inertia. That's why it's culture. It works because it lasts. But culture strangles innovation in the crib. And finally, I felt I'd made the case that independent, robust and strong leadership, and I speak here about dementia services in the county, is essential. And I do recall saying that we should be looking at an individual, not a committee. I believe that the case for that leadership is stronger than ever. And I hope that the culture in the background will not be a barrier to thinking about something which is essential as that. I am very grateful to you for having me back. I trust that the thinking that I've offered will be taken in the spirit in which it really is meant. And I'm very happy to be involved in other ways. Get hold of me if you feel like I can make a contribution. Please do. And for Mr. Watson, I am still minded to write that paper on leadership. But frankly, the manner in which I've watched paint dry in the last few months has been a cause for considerable despondency. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your time.
Thank you, Richard, for your very honest and open reflections. I don't know that there's anything that you said that I would be directly challenging back. There's a number of things from a clarification perspective that I'd be happy to give a bit of light on, particularly from the doctor input from primary care and the development of the dementia diagnosis pathway that we have got. The question is about its impact. But I don't think there's any doubt that there has been primary care medical input into the development of it. I think our challenge is around the impact of it. And yes, the culture, it starts and it ends with culture. And, you know, my own personal view is that a culture is an environment which we all either thrive in or die in, depending on what the culture actually is. You know, from a microbiological perspective, that's what cultures do. And the issue of this being not only a biological issue, you know, dementia and its biological causes, but the psychological impact and the social impact of it is, for me, one of the demonstrations of why health care voluntary sector does need to work in a much more integrated manner, which does challenge leadership, because they, you know, all of those areas do come at the issue from their own and through their own lenses.
Yeah.
And the challenge for us is how actually the lens needs to not be focused on what we do as organizations, but what we do for the person at the center of what it is we're trying to help. And how that gets translated through the culture into something that has meaningful impact for individuals and the people who care for them. So, you know, I fully concur with the observations and the challenges that we continue to have, some of which appear very straightforward and very process, and others which are more complex. Yep. And more about, as I say, the culture of how we work together to resolve these issues. And I thank you for the contribution you're continuing to make and the striving you continue to do in terms of trying to influence what happens in a number of those areas. Richard.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Richard. Good to see you again. And I'm not going to sit here virtually and try and defend some of the positions that we find ourselves in. I don't think collectively we have made the progress that we need to make and we would hope to make. If I can start with some positives, though, just to kind of balance, and then I'll come back particularly to the Dementia Action Partnership. So thank you first for your kind words, which I'll pass on to Rob. That's very nice of you to say that. And I know that you meet with Rob on a regular basis, and Rob remains our key person, at least within the clinical commissioning groups on a day-to-day basis, just for the board's benefit around our dementia work, alongside Eugene within the team. So we are at the process now of, as I think the board's aware, completing the dementia support procurement process, with mobilisation underway for a start date of April 1st. And I think the board's aware we've got a change of organisation in that, but there is also an opportunity to refresh the model that we've got and indeed build on that. And thank you, Richard, for your personal support in the process to getting to that outcome. And I'm hoping, as you said earlier in your comments, you'll continue with that, because I think it's not an end process. We want to continue to develop that support service over the months and years ahead, learning from what we've already got to date. I think the second thing to say is related to primary care, actually, is our engagement with primary care, which we've continued to step up, particularly related to where we know we're not there yet on our dementia diagnosis rate and our dementia checks. So we've now got an organisation we've commissioned to work jointly with primary care across all three of our clinical commissioning groups to review and support quality improvement of both the processes and the practices underway with dementia. And we've also deployed a couple of GPs, actually, from the local patch who have more of an interest and expertise in dementia to go out and support that work, and also with a specific focus on raising awareness, education, and supporting the completion of assessments by their peers out in primary care. So we're leading by example through those individuals. I think with all the other challenges that primary care are experiencing at the moment, obviously we're trying to still ensure that dementia is up there in terms of a priority, which it absolutely remains. We're also reviewing antipsychotic medication use, which is an incredibly important part, I think, of the work that we need to do within primary care. And again, we've got support for that through our team. So that's just some specific work that's happening with primary care. With our memory assessment and support services, we've funded additional support workers to enhance further the assessment and diagnosis pathway. So we know that there are still challenges in waiting lists, although at the moment we are the Trust NSFT is meeting its 12-week target for that assessment with 90% of those, but we want to do more. We want to get better on that. And also we're piloting now 7-day working for the dementia intensive support team in the West. And I'm very, very keen that we also now do that in Ipswich and East and get a move on around that, because we do really need to see these services 7 days, not a 5-day Monday to Friday service. We've also rolled out the virtual dementia tour, and indeed the executive directors have got a session coming up, I think the week after next, where we're going to be experiencing or trying to experience what it's like for someone with dementia through that dementia tour process, which I think is incredibly important for leaders across our ICS to take part in, to get a bit of a sense about what's going on. Apologies, I'm continually coughing over the last week. I haven't got COVID though. Well, as of yesterday. I think the bit then linking back in now to your point, Richard, which I have to say I share and sympathise with some of your frustrations related to this, is the Dementia Action Partnership. But just to give the board some background to this, so the Health and Wellbeing Board, I think it was quite a while ago now, said there needed to be a refreshed focus on dementia and having a clearer strategic approach and then action plan across the system, Suffolk system to this. So the what came out of that was Suffolk County Council leading off on a Dementia Action Partnership, it was entitled, which brought together various organisations within the field of dementia, supported by the Dementia Forum that Richard's referenced, which brings in lived experience, excuse me, to support the development of that strategy. I think it's fair to say, and this is a personal view, that has not progressed both in terms of the pace or necessarily the way in which that is organised. And there's a couple of reflections I would give on that. I do think there needs to be a clarification on I'm going to call it a champion rather than a leader. And I stress a leader. And I know, Richard, you and I differ on our views on leadership in that respect. I do think we need a champion, an independent champion, in the way that we are doing with some of our other integrated care system higher ambitions like suicide prevention. So having someone that bangs the drum rightly for dementia and improving the outcomes for our population, I think is an eminently sensible suggestion, and one I think we should try and progress with our partners. I think that champion could play a lead role rightly in actually either the chair or the support to the Dementia Action Partnership. I think there's, at the moment, we aren't clear yet around the timeline and the process for that strategy development. The process that I understand we're in at the moment is working with Health Watch, who are mapping out, and I know they've had yours, Richard, personal experiences, lived experiences of those with dementia, their families, to inform the development of that strategy. But I think we need to clarify what the next steps are and the timeline and who and how we're going to be forming that strategy, and then the consequent action plan with quick wins. And with that in mind, we're setting a further meeting up with the leadership, excuse me, of Suffolk County Council to explore what we can do to try and support expediting that in a timely fashion fairly rapidly, hoping in the next week or two. I do think we need some shorter term, as you put it, quicker wins. We've done some of that in our world, so to speak, with some of the actions I've already outlined. But is there an opportunity to think differently through this approach to some things we could do collectively across the partnership to move forward at a quicker pace? So, as I say, I think there are actions we've taken within one sense, but I do think, as Richard, you're saying, I don't think we've progressed at the pace or the organisational clarity that we would want within that DAP. And I'd welcome other comments, reflections from board members around your own experience about what you might be able to do as well in furthering that, or anything else that's happening in your worlds that might support this agenda.
Thank you, Richard.
Yes, if I can just come back very quickly. First of all, I've done the virtual dementia tour. I want to put in a plug for it. It's well worth doing. And it's probably a bit like vaccination. You know, you're going to have the anti-vax or whatever it is. You can't mandate it. I would encourage people to do it. It doesn't take a lot of time. It's well worth it. It's very open. It's very revealing. Richard, I'm not going to fall out with you about the difference between a champion and a leader. The most important thing that you stated, in my view, was to use the adjective independent. For the life of me, I cannot understand how you can have leadership of something there, which is then leadership elsewhere and leadership elsewhere. It's a conflict of interest. There can be no independence. You'll probably know what I'm talking about, but it doesn't work. Another point I just wanted to make very briefly, I'm not sure that the board will be aware of this, but the Suffolk Carers strategy is in the process of being renewed. And it has a deadline of the end of June this year. What it is replacing, I'll not comment on, or simply say that I sent the existing document to 10 professional people in different walks of life. You would not want to hear their comments, which, I mean, it's something much better is needed, and it cannot be something simply to gather dust on the shelf. And it also needs to be something which is not seen as just being county council. Again, it's got to have this holistic approach. It's got to be collective. And somebody needs to sign in blood, and it must contain an action plan. You know, a strategy is not a strategy if it doesn't have an action plan. And then the final point I'd make in terms of this mapping, well, I completed mine 5.5 months ago. I really do not know why they're still mapping. It's a nonsense. Anyhow, those are just a few thoughts, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Any other comments from other board members? Maddie.
So just alongside Richard's comment and Richard Watson's comment in response to Mr. Passmore.
Please call me Richard.
Thank you. So another backbone, Richard, of your proposals is about improving the coordination of care. And we spoke about this briefly last time, and I shared with you the Alliance strategy. And behind that is indeed an action plan. And one of the critical parts of that is the coordination of care within integrated neighbourhood teams.
Yeah.
And this is a journey. We talked about culture. This is a journey of change, of how we are trying to bring together the GPs, social care colleagues, community health colleagues with the voluntary sector and our district and borough colleagues, all of whom I think are very important to supporting individuals with dementia. We have most recently, although to be honest, we're challenged to fill some of these posts, agreed additional care coordinator roles within the integrated neighbourhood teams. And that's happening both within primary care through some of the policy developments there, but also to support all of the partners to try and support them in gluing together and to fulfil our ambition to join up care. So with this, I also would agree that, you know, we are very ambitious perhaps in our pace, but we have not yet reached the point of the integration that I think we're all seeking to achieve. But the additional investments we're made in the recruitment, which is out there, will support that. So, sorry, I should have also said, apologies, that our mental health trust colleagues, NSFT, are also a key part of the integrated neighbourhood team. So it's just to share openly the journey that we're on in that regard locally. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think two other comments that I would make, Richard. One is something called personalisation. It's another term that's being promoted within the NHS. It is about how care and care plans are personalised, as you were saying in the NICE guidance, tailored to the individual, and how we change to taking that approach rather than the blanket. You have this, therefore here have this, which is part of the blanket approach to managing an individual. So that is into primary care networks. It's coming into integrated neighbourhood teams. Another example of something that's going ahead, starting in Felixstowe, but also moving out into another two of our integrated neighbourhood team areas, is in support of something that's being evaluated academically locally, called ICOPE, which is integrated care for older people. Yeah. And whilst it isn't a specific dementia programme, it is looking at how frailty can be prevented in the future. But one of the most important aspects that we are also testing is the importance of a carer plan as much as a care plan. Yeah. So you know, if we can't have a meaningful care plan without a plan that supports carers, and we're working with Suffolk family carers on how do we do that. And there's an academic evaluation of the ICOPE part, and something that we're going to work alongside Suffolk family carers with. And you may well know that Suffolk family carers were given a challenge by Suffolk County Council and commissioned by them to do this in recognising and highlighting and doing carer assessments in much more broad ways than is currently being done, and hopefully contributing to that care strategy going forward as a consequence. Did you want to come back?
Yeah, just very quickly. You may be interested to know that there's a meeting on the 7th of February. I've introduced the Deputy Chair of the Suffolk branch of the Royal British Legion to family carers, because the Royal British Legion have got all kinds of issues in terms of, and this is not just about old people from the war, but, you know, younger people with drug problems and goodness knows what. So there's a meeting taking place on there. So if you like, I've sort of spread the word there a bit. I'm quite pleased about that. You may also be interested to know that my son and I, we thought last October that things had been so grisly for a little while that we had a reception at a club in London, and the youngsters said, come on, let's try and raise some money. So on the back of that, £4,000 has actually just been given to Suffolk family carers, specifically for the enhancement of dementia support services in the county. I suppose I'm blowing my own trumpet a bit there, but you know, we're trying to do our best in all possible ways if we can. And then I'd simply like to thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, again for listening to me. And please don't think I'm like a crack record.
No, you know, we need mirrors being held up on regular basis. And as long as the reflection is true, then you know, it's up to us to make the difference. So I would thank you for your continuing contributions, and I would also congratulate you on raising that money and making sure it supports a very worthy local charity. So thank you for that continuing work, and hopefully we will make more progress at a faster pace than has been the case to date, and demonstrate some leadership along the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And good morning to you all.
Thank you. So we've had yet more longer debate on the issue than we were anticipating, but good debate nevertheless. And thank you to everyone and Richard for his contribution to that discussion. Shall we move on to item 8 and the sustainability update? Amanda, it's over to you, and I notice we have Andrew with us as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chair. And I'll just do a few words of opening before I pass over to Andrew. But I'm delighted that we're able to showcase the great work that Andrew and team have been leading on for the past 12 months. And Andrew's really going to bring to life the work that he and colleagues have been doing internally within our CCG, but also as a system in terms of how we are really gathering at pace some great work to fulfil the Green Plan. So Andrew, do you want to showcase some of your great work?
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to emphasise that I am the front man of a very dedicated group of people who are committed. So it's certainly not just my own work. Apologies to colleagues who may have heard some of this before, but for the benefit of members of the public who be joining us, just a few scene sets, but I won't go for everything. We're often asked why we're looking at climate change and why sustainability is so important. Well, in a nutshell, the NHS is responsible for 5% of the UK's carbon emissions. Many people will say, well, what's that got to do with health? And my immediate response is absolutely everything. And that is part of a key message internally with colleagues that people are still having to understand, but also the role that we have, as well as primary care has, in engaging with our communities with that. And I'll give you some examples of that. So because we are responsible for 5% and because we are trusted messengers with members of our community, we are part of a problem, but we're also very much part of a solution. And so we have an opportunity and a responsibility to tackle this, whilst also tackling some health issues. So rather than focus on the traditional media way of disaster campaigning and the end of the world is nigh, for want of a better phrase, let's focus on some positives. If the UK hits its climate change targets, and that's to be carbon neutral by 2050. Dietary changes alone, it's estimated, will save potentially 100,000 lives a year, and that's just more fruit and vegetables and less red and processed meat. Improving air quality will improve people's standard of life and save lives. I think 38,000 people apparently die from air pollution and air quality issues are related to that nationally. And also leading more active lifestyles and exercising. So by focusing on some of the health impacts and some of the positive benefits, we can start to mitigate some of the undoubted issues that are coming our way in terms of pressure on services. We're seeing extreme weather events such as heat waves, flooding, surface water flooding. I don't think anyone needs reminding of the two A&E departments that were closed in London last summer because of the deluge. Now that's happening because the atmosphere is warming, and a warmer atmosphere retains more moisture, and so we get these biblical downpours of rain. So there's an operational and there's a health issue, and then if we throw in an ageing population and future pressure on services, we've got a bit of a perfect storm. No pun intended, sorry. So looking at that and marrying this together, my job is to really support colleagues, the wider system, our care partners and members of the public on this journey, and very much engaging and bringing people with us. Amanda chairs our sustainability steering group and is our director responsible for sustainability. So that's some headlines why we're doing it and what we're looking at. So in terms of what we've been doing and what we will be doing, really very much the last year has been about embedding this, raising awareness, starting to engage and getting some quick wins in some key areas. And that will continue for next year. So we've already completed a website to raise awareness and a climate change event for healthcare professionals to see those links on the ICS website, and we're working with our comms team to do the same thing for our own website. Just some themes in terms of what our future green plans will look like. We already have a green action plan. We're already starting to do work along those lines, and you will see items such as in North East Essex, for instance, there's an electric vehicle charging point. So we're all starting to do things differently. The thing that's come out of engagement very much is the role of workforce leadership and investing in our people, and that training and upskilling and making this as real and as relevant and as easy as possible. And that will be mine and the team's job. There's also a role around engaging with wider system partners and colleagues. So we are members of the Suffolk Climate Change Environment and Energy Board, and we contributed significantly to the Suffolk Climate Change Plan. What that's allowing us to do is to look at much more strategically in terms of assets, approaches, where we don't need to duplicate and we can save money, public money. And that's looking at a whole myriad of things such as electric vehicle infrastructure and charging, how we might approach and conduct and support local authority colleagues on air pollution campaigns on Clean Air Day, and also looking at more headline items like single-use plastics and greening spaces. In terms of medicines, another high-profile area, the use of metered dose inhalers for those with respiratory conditions, COPD and asthma. These represent the largest carbon footprint within primary care in terms of medicines. And that's because of the propellant that's used in some of the pressurized metered dose inhalers instead of the powdered versions. The often used statistic is the equivalent of one of the worst offending inhalers is the equivalent of driving from London to Sheffield, about 175 miles in terms of equivalent emissions, whereas a dry powdered inhaler is like driving 4 miles across town. There's also a link there, not just with the environment, but also with health, because it is noted that increased use of certain inhalers is a marker of poor disease control. So that's going to be built into our thinking to target that, to get health impacts and incomes. And our medicines management team have already rolled out some training to the pharmacy forums before Christmas, and we'll be looking to do some training to gear up the respiratory nursing teams over the next 3 months to support them whilst we finalise our engagement and comms around that. Now that does bring me to patient and public engagement. One element of that patient and public engagement for this will be patient participation groups, certainly around inhaler switches and uses, and actually working with them so that they can help us frame how we actually convey this message and engage with our communities on why these switches are important. And we always have to remember this has to be clinically appropriate as well. This isn't a switch for a switch's sake. The other patient engagement work that we'll be doing is looking at the impact of digital healthcare, remote models of care, building on the Health Watch work that was done last year, and also engagement with our voluntary and community sector, who are going to be increasingly important and integral to this work going forward. So into Q4 this year, what am myself and the team working on? Well, as Amanda alluded to, not only are we updating our own CCG or ICB Green Plan going forward, we're also I'm also coordinating a system-wide response to this. So each ICS across the country has to have a system-wide green plan where we start to take this mindset of away from provider and to a system-wide approach where we can start to get synergies and benefits. So delivering value for the taxpayer and also delivering value for the system and acting as a real enabler. So that process is ongoing. Our trusts, and I count the 5 trusts that work and support within SNE, 4 have had theirs board approved. 1 is approved but still requires board approval, and that will be next month. So we're collaborating them together. We're also doing a very specific piece of work about primary care engagement using a GP so that GPs can talk to the GPs about these are the pivotal issues. If you want us to land this is what we're going to need, and so on and so forth. So this is very much a dialogue phase and listening to people to develop things. Some of the headlines that are coming out of that: collaborative work around estates and shared spaces, meter dose inhalers I've touched on, electric vehicles and infrastructure, and what will our strategy be over the next 5 to 10 years and how will we link that together? And absolutely critical, staff workforce and engagement. So we'll be holding an ICS-wide workshop on staff training and upskilling to get the opinions of everyone across the system to build that into the first next green plan. Just quickly, some elements that we're going to be looking at next year: training and development. I mentioned inhalers, looking at anaesthetic gas switches, and certainly looking at some high profile areas that people can really tune into. So we're really keen on the development of green spaces and social prescribing models, such as what we've got in Whitton and at Kennedy Way in Clacton. And that really does help people's mental health. And there's some really exciting conversation going on with some bodies, including the Royal Horticultural Society, about how we might link in and do that, and link our community groups into that model. We'll also look at transport and travel and flexible working and digital platforms. So there's going to be a lot more engagement, a lot of work, but the message is starting to land, and I hope that gives you a flavour for what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Andrew. Lorna.
I love your backdrop. It makes you look as though you're in a picture gallery. I love it. Right, that's very one of the things that I think is an important subject for the mental health of the youth. I think they want to see us doing something, and I think that cannot be underestimated. I think they want to see a sense of this big problem being tackled, and looking for older people for some leadership on this. So I'm really pleased about that. And the other thing I think I would like to say is that the science is moving very fast about this now. So, for example, in terms of the anaesthetic gases, it may be, once we have looked at the pollution from the other anaesthetic agents which are given intravenously, that we swing back to anaesthetic gases with recycling, which I think that could well happen, because we're now beginning to understand a lot more about medical drug pollution of soil and the waterways. And that is going to be moving at speed. And I think the bottom line is, for everybody, is to reduce waste and not do things if they're not necessary. And I think that has to be, number one lesson. It's going to save the CCG money, and it's going to reduce our environmental footprint. And I think that is the most important thing, that should be a golden thread that run through the whole of our CCG and now the ICS. And that also is involved obviously heavily with procurement, is to make sure we're not seeing waste and duplication, and we're holding our providers to account for that. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Lorna. Mark, do you want me to comment on that, or do you want Maddie to come in?
Let's just go round first, Andrew, if you don't mind, and then come back. Maddie.
Thanks, Andrew. And with every conversation comes new developments and such positive developments. And actually, I think, as Lorna said, in very challenging times, this is something that galvanises us all, and which everybody has a part to play. And the point, very supportive work around inhalers, and thank you so much for the way in which you've been working with the medicines management teams. This is about choosing the right item, and as you say, through training, enabling people to have the confidence that it does exactly the same job, if not better. So thank you for that. Also to the topic of waste. So I just want to sort of take our minds back, because a few years ago, we had a huge campaign on medicines waste. And so this is related to, but different from, the presentation that Andrew's just given. And we saw practices working with their PPGs, asking people to bring back any waste from medicines, and demonstrating with that the importance of only ordering what you need. At that point, I think it's fair to say that our focus was very much on finance and on safety. We are introducing now a third such important element as to why we should only order what we need for safety's sake, in order that finances can be reinvested, and in order to protect our environment and for sustainability. And I believe, as Lorna has said, that the public and the practices will be very committed to working on that agenda with us. And the results of what we did were to enable us to reach a position in financial terms within prescribing that allowed us to invest in social prescribing, which now is extended into green social prescribing. So there is here a win-win-win. And thank you, Andrew, for all that you're doing to lead us to that position. And I'm very committed to continuing that best I can alongside. Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie.
And social value as a consequence of it being locally derived prescription rather than imported. Ed.
Thanks, Andrew, for all you're doing. As you'll know, the average email with an attachment uses about 50 grams of CO2, and over a year, that's the equivalent for the average CCG employee of driving about 200 miles. So in the Norfolk and Waveney CCG, we've set an ambition to reduce email use by 50% by August, which staff are signing up to. And I'm interested in your thoughts on whether we could do something similar or even better in SNE.
Well, there's a challenge that I would be very happy to back, and I'm sure everyone around this virtual table would be very happy to back, particularly around how we can be more succinct in what we're saying and how often we need to say it. And if we can get rid of the reply to all as a first step, that would be great. And if we can get rid of future NHS collaboration website, that would stop probably about a third of my emails coming from all the way around the country. So I'd be very grateful if you could just sort that out for me tomorrow, Andrew. So back to you to respond.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I may as well start in reverse order. Yeah, thank you, Ed. That's a very fair challenge. Part of the engagement piece I'm doing is so that, to use the phrase that was used in the previous talk, we don't want this strategy to be something that's a report that sits on the shelf. We actually want some action. So reducing our email use is one challenge. Also looking at how big our files are, how we store data, turning off our cameras when we work from home. So there's a whole suite of options, and also switching not potentially just our search engines to a search engine called Ecosia, which plants trees and is still driven by Google, but also looking at potentially mobile phone contracts, which also can contribute to rewilding projects. So It's a fair challenge and one I'd be very happy to take up and work with the teams on doing that, because it's very visual. So challenge accepted, because we've been working on it. So thank you. We'll look to that. And like Mark says, there's a lot of wastage, and just something very simple for everyone. If you're arranging a meeting with somebody, often people will respond to an email and say, that's great, I'll send you an email invite. Actually, you can respond with the invite by encapsulating the message and not sending two messages. So there's lots of pretty simple things that people can do that we can start to whittle that down. So yeah, thank you, Fred. That could consider that. We'll take that on. In terms of Maddie, thank you. And then the waste, and medicines amnesties, I think, need to form part of what we're doing, and that does tie into what Lorna was raising about this new mythical word that everyone's using called the circular economy. And that is basically, as a species and as a planet, we are going to run out of resources. That if we carry on the way we are, that's not me being the doomsday. There are only so many rare metal earths, there is only so much phosphate in the ground, and so on and so forth. So the circular economy is something that basically seeks to mimic nature. So we will move away from reducing. So if you think about how we've managed resources and waste, it's been very linear: reduce, reuse, recycle. Then you get to the end, it's gone. Matter's gone. Whereas a circular economy seeks to mimic nature and extract the maximum it can out of every single stage of the life cycle of any given material. So to build on Lorna's point, absolutely. And the thing I'd like to frame, and the narrative that I want us to develop and be comfortable with so it becomes normalised, is that health, circular economy, carbon and green spaces are all completely interlinked, so that we don't silo this, so we make it really straightforward that people can see those links. And we'll be doing some work on single-use plastics in the next year to start to look at that. In terms of the anaesthetic gases, that will be really interesting, Lorna, because we've just learned last week that the targets are going to change next year. But actually, greener NHS is going to look to the anaesthetic gas suppliers rather than the ICSs to measure and monitor that. So there's some dialogue going on there. I'm not familiar with what that is, but that there'll be the dialogue for them to report back to us. We'll be doing it. But absolutely, all of this goes in hand. I talk a lot about holistic thinking, that we can reduce our travel impacts, which saves money and improves the air quality for our communities that we drive through. So actually, a lot of this is often a no-brainer. Some's going to cost money, but then that's up to me and the team and others to look at innovative ways in which we might do that. And the Suffolk Climate Change Board is already lobbying central government on potential grant funding to shore up certain issues. So I hope that helps, and I hope that answers people's questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew, for the report and also for the responses. Thank you, Ford, for the interest you're showing in this. Something that we will no doubt return to when a new sustainable system is in our grasp, when the CCG is gone, no doubt. So thank you, Andrew. We note the report. Shall we move on to the procurement update, Paul?
Thanks, Chair. Given the interest of time, I'll jump straight into the paper, if that's okay. So 3 points really around procurement. Last governing body, I reported that would be circulating a paper to clinical execs around the process of procurement. We've now done that, and that's subject to a part 2 discussion later in terms of the procurement, with the hope of standard procurement in April 22. So some movement on that. Around the mental health assurance bit, we have experienced some delays. That's in part because of the pandemic COVID level 4 that we're in, and also business continuity issues and CQC visit at North Suffolk Trust. But again, that's back online, and we've got things set up and to progress. We have continued either with the procurement bit of the mental health, learning, disability and autism framework. And again, that's due to conclude and be fed back in March governing body. And finally, part of the conversation around dementia, as Richard already mentioned, we are mobilising the Alzheimer's Society UK to delivering first services from the beginning of April. So I'll stop there, Mark, and hope that's succinct enough.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Any questions, Lorna?
Yeah, sorry, Paul, just on the back of what Andrew has gone on about, discussed about sustainability, I think that every procurement going forward, in there, it must be, you know, what are their plans, where are they going to reduce their waste, etc.
Yeah, so Lorna, I can assure you that within the service specification and what is going on, particularly with pathology, that is very much part of that documentation expectation for that procurement process.
Good, thank you. And as raised at the Health and Wellbeing Board recently, also where can we drive social value, local social value from our procurements as well? Thank you for that. Shall we move on to the item 10 then, the Level 4 National Incident Report? Paul.
Yeah, thank you again. So you will notice that the IPR report is rather light. So Mark, whilst I've been given 5 minutes, I'll probably take a bit longer, but we'll catch up the time if that's okay, because I think it's quite an important bit of conversation. So I think before I sort of start, I think this paper needs to be seen in conjunction with the significant winter planning that we did. Is an extension. So again, it's a very narrow piece of work that essentially describe what level 4 means in terms of direct national command and control. So on the 12th of December, nationally, the major incident was escalated to level 4, moved straight into national command and control, which essentially means that we have to respond to directions from the national team and regional team and as such. So the next sort of comment I would make is that it's very narrow in its approach. So very much looked at the focus on vaccination, which I'll touch base on a little bit, around increasing patient flow and safeguarding that particular element through what was likely to be a very difficult winter anyway. And then also really to look at the workforce and maintaining and supporting elective recovery were the main focus of that. So if I may, I'll just quickly dash through the slides in terms of brief summary, and I'm sure some of my colleagues may want to actually input into some of the conversation. So first of all, the first couple of slides really talk about the Eprs structure and the fact that we've actually established a command and control of our own, which is a CCG Health, which is actually meets twice a week, chaired by myself as the accountable officer and Ed as a chief executive and AO of the system. That is supported by almost daily tactical cell meetings across all the alliances to work with our provider, in particular our acute providers, and have the relevant conversation we can to try and sustain, if you want, flow and safety of patient care within the system. So really sort of a stepped up sort of process. And then it's essentially the slides have gone to talk about a number of key areas that have been the focus of the direction. So in terms of vaccinations, very quickly, just to reiterate the point, 2.2 million vaccination, 84.5% of our eligible population have received boosters. And I think that's about 590,000 patients. So actually phenomenal effort, really, in a very, very short period of time. And that's equivalently 58% of our total population. So again, leading on that in terms of the region in East, and staff have been commented, and we moved very quickly, as Ed has already alluded to. But equally, not forgetting that flu was always going to be a potential problem for ourselves. And just to point out, we managed to achieve 60% of eligible, again, which is the second highest in the region. So again, in parallel to the COVID action, we've also focused on flu, which is clearly a sort of concern. Moving quickly on to urgent and emergency care. I think Ed has already sort of mentioned that we've been on OPAL level 3, whilst a number of systems around us have been at OPAL level 4. Being essentially the highest, and beyond that you get into the major incident territory, really. So just to give you an idea of the size of the challenge. I suppose on the 13th of January, the slides point to the fact that we had about 187 patients which were COVID positive. It's important in our hospitals. That's the important point around here, is that it's not necessarily admission with COVID. It is also partly outbreaks of COVID as a reflection of the number of COVID in our population, which causes significant operational difficulty within our acute trust, i.e. you might have a position where you might close 110 beds, 20, 30 beds you can't use because of infection control prevention measures. So on top of the challenges, outbreak and COVID patients cause some significant challenge. I'm pleased to say that there are some early indication that the number is reducing. I think as of yesterday, it's about 160 patients as opposed to 197 patients, but it is a bit early to tell yet, and we're cautiously watching that. We've experienced care home outbreaks, despite some vociferous support into infection control, which clearly has impact on patient discharge to make sure that we don't spread COVID across our system. We have struggled with gaps in our domiciliary care market, and we've worked very, very closely with our local authority colleagues to try and ensure that up and create enough capacity to be able to carry on meeting and discharging patients. And we've also seen, as a consequence of that, some increase in our journey time in our A&E departments, and also some ambulance delays at the front door. And whilst no ambulance delay is acceptable, in terms of benchmarking, if you want, across our other system, we are well within the tolerance zone that's been set by the East Ambulance Services in terms of what might have been expected. So again, benchmark-wise, we are doing very well, but again, there are too many delays, and we continue to focus on that. So just very quickly, in terms of what we've done to react to that, we've had a multidisciplinary sort of agency event, which is actually bringing the whole system together to focus on discharges. We've met the aspiration, I think, of 50% reduction in our delayed discharge before Christmas, and we're now working toward the target of 30% to try and reduce and create flow. We've opened significant amount of additional capacity, both in our acute and in the community. I think about 81 beds in our acute hospitals, with a plan, if we needed to open circa another 90 to 100 beds, if we need to, on term what's been termed as super surge. It's not a term I particularly like, but so described in the event that we needed to. I hope that we don't need to do that, given the weather figures are going at the moment, but the plans are in place. We've opened actual 100 actual community beds over that period of time to cope with the discharges, and we have focused on virtual wards, admission avoidances, hospices, etc. So again, a lot of proactiveness in terms of trying to focus on improving to the discharges out of our hospitals. Quickly moving on to tactical sales. You will see from the slides that the tactical sales mirrors the priorities I've already set out, but it deepened that relationship around voluntary care sector, primary care response, and a far more sort of system approach at locality level in terms of supporting our local hospitals and in terms of managing the pressure that we are experiencing. In terms of workforce, I think, Mark, in your introduction, you already stated the importance of workforce. And the slides talk about an 8% sickness level, of which is about 50% higher than we would normally expect. That has been usually problematic across the whole system, both in primary care and I think in our acute services and other providers. The slight sort of a nugget of positiveness I can bring out of that is, at one point we were predicting 25%. So again, we've not reached that element. So usually positive that we haven't, but actually still a major issue in terms of operability across our system. And in terms of workforce, again, and Amanda, I'm sure would probably want to come in if there are questions. We've really pushed mutual aid and system support. We've mobilised, a lot of our CCG staff, and I think about 236 staff have been sort of redeployed, in particular to support vaccination programme, and that has to be commented and in terms of our business continuity plans. Sorry, did you want me to pause this? There's a couple of hands now. I'll finish off. Or do you want me to finish?
I think
okay.
Lorna might be a legacy.
Okay, so very quickly. So elective, the main sort of direction around elective was maintain your urgent care and your urgent elective surgery. We managed to do that. Continue to focus on the really long waits, 104-week waits. I have to say we are still predicting some long waiters, but we are still moving in the right direction. I've got plans to try and reduce that, but by the end of March, I've not lost sight of that. There has been some cancelled elective activity, but that is part of the normal ebb and flow you would expect of a winter, but particularly challenging with the pandemic. Straight off the press, in the last week or so, the national team have brokered a contract with the private sector to enable us to incentivize further elective work, but also surge should we need to into the private sector should we hit certain triggers. I think I'm glad to report I suspect we won't hit any of those triggers given where we are, but that is there just in case. We've worked very hard with mutual aid across all acute sector to provide and continue our elective activity, particularly around orthopedics, gynae, general surgery, etc. And we are planning to reopen some of the capacity we've lost in West Suffolk as part of remedial work. Cancer is in the slide, the work has continued. And finally, I think just in conclusion, I think just to reiterate, there has been significant pressures in the system. There are early signs that the pressure is easing, and I use the words carefully. And I'd like to echo really a sentiment both Ed and a few other people have said around the table that we will not be able to manage as we have without the support of the wider public sector team and partners to manage and the support that we've actually received under very, very difficult circumstances. And for me personally, it's been a humbling experience to see staff giving up their leave, giving their own time, volunteering in their own personal time to support the effort that we've actually undertaken. So finally, I would also point to the real impressive vaccination effort that we've undertaken, which I'm sure has contributed to us being able to manage as we have. We're certainly not out of the woods yet, but I think it's quite an important sort of conversation to have to inform the board of the effort that we've undertaken as part of the level 4 incident. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Excellent summary of what's been happening and the immensity of the work that's been happening. Amanda.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I would like to build on really what Paul has said from a workforce space and just underscore a couple of the key points which were included in the slide deck. So if we start off with the redeployment, so since the beginning of December, we have not only successfully redeployed in excess of 230 of our own CCG staff, but if we actually look at what that equates to across the wider system, including local government colleagues, we actually are nearer 500 staff that have been redeployed, which is tremendous success. And, you know, really supportive of the way our system has come together over recent weeks. Some of that has started to reduce, obviously, but I think should we ever need to be deploying this in the future, I think we've got a good framework and mobilisation working with system partners to really put in place. To support the redeployment, we clearly also came together as a system to enhance our mutual aid agreements that we had put in place a year ago. And that was further supplemented by a standing operating procedure. And what that has in effect done is enable us as a system to flow and flex our workforce across the system in a coordinated and much needed way. That, I think, has also further supported our approach to sickness absence. And as Paul said rightly, we were experiencing sickness absence of 8%. That has now reduced over recent weeks, and of yesterday we are reporting sickness of 5.5%. Now, if we compare that position to a year ago, we've actually reduced by 30%. So January 2020, we're reporting as a system 8.1 sickness percent. A typical winter sickness is roughly about 4.5. And whilst, you know, we've still got high levels of sickness, we're starting to see a slight downward trend, but we are clearly not complacent. And going back to the mutual aid and SOP that I referred to, that has now been further supported and enhanced so that we actually can support the wider system with regards to the work we're doing around the VCOD, the vaccination as a condition of employment going forward. So we're in the early stages of really as a system understanding what the numbers look like and how we can come together as a system and look at opportunity for redeployment and the like. But I just wanted to highlight those few points, Chair, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Points very well made. Ed.
Yeah, the only comment I was going to make is to coin a quote from earlier that you've been an excellent captain on the bridge, Paul. So take a lot of credit for how you've marshalled the system. So thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you. Lisa.
Thank you. Just some of the learning from deploying our clinical staff into other organisations and into the vaccination process. I think as we go forward, it would be really helpful if each clinical member of staff had within the year some professional development time where they have a 2-week period, maybe split or something like that, to keep contact with clinical practice. I think it is incredibly frightening for staff who have predominantly worked at home as well to suddenly be told, okay, you know, you need to go and back and be a district nurse, or you need to go back into critical care. Yeah, we know you haven't been there for a few years, but and the experience is when clinical areas are under such pressure that they need to enact our mutual aid, the support that our staff get going into those environments is not as any of us would want. The receiving clinical environment wouldn't want it as well. So there's something about, I don't know whether we call it keeping in touch days or something like that. How do we support our staff and give them the ability during normal time for them to keep in touch with clinical practice, so that when we need to step them up, we can really mobilise quickly?
I think it's an excellent point, well made, Lisa. And you know, just in terms of how we are looking at the way in which a system works, it's no longer about a contract and performance management. It is about mutual understanding and the ability to take that mutual understanding and make it work better as a consequence of that understanding. So I've got on my sheet, we must not lose the collaborative approach that has been fostered. You know, the marshalling, commanding and control has to step down, because you cannot take that approach. It has to be a different approach, but one that, you know, shouldn't be able to elude us. I wanted to particularly thank our ESNEF colleagues for the support they've given to West Suffolk patients and their with the challenges they've had with their capacity to provide elective surgery. We must not lose the benefit of the collaboration that should be how we move forward now, not regressing back to old ways. And my other point would be really about how we're going to recognise that recovery will include staff recovering, all of us recovering, and resetting the pace in the context of the workforce capacity that we know needs support. So, you know, what are we going to do about supporting what you were saying there, Lisa? What are we going to do about supporting the collaborative approach? What are we going to do about supporting recovery in the whole system as a consequence of coming out of this particular wave of COVID? So a welcome report to show just the extent, the breadth and the depth at which everyone has been working, and why they need our thanks, including all of you guys, but also to ensure that none of the positive lessons that have been learned from this are dropped. So thank you for the report, Paul, and yes, let's think hard about how we take the positives on from where we are. Shall we move into the Better Care Fund, Section 75 agreement? Jane?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is a paper which is trying to tell you all things about the Better Care Fund in summary form. It's effectively providing the plan, or a narrative on the plan that has been submitted for 21-22. It was submitted around the time of our last board meeting, so it's come to the first available governing body for approval. And what it contains is the actual document itself, as well as some details on the submission that we make, as the Better Care Fund is submitted up through central processes after being developed and signed off by the Health and Wellbeing Board. So just some real headlines on it. The Better Care Fund is for Suffolk, so it covers all of Suffolk as a county and therefore incorporates the 3 CCGs that, as 3 separate pools as part of it, as you'll see in the table. Ipswich and East is the largest of the 3 pools at 47.5 million out of the total, just shy of 92 million that goes into the Better Care Fund. That's a combination, as you'll have read in the paper, a combination of different funding sources, but from the CCG point of view, we receive a part of our allocation which is specifically ring fence to put into the Better Care Fund, and that's 56.6 million across the 3 CCGs. So it does make up the over half of the overall Better Care Fund itself. Hopefully this paper gives you some background on the context and the national requirements which the Better Care Fund is operating. And so whilst we do have some local freedoms around it, is also around basically fulfilling a set of requirements which are set out in the paper. As a final thing, Chair, I just wanted to point out that this was submitted around about the time of our last governing body, and I'm pleased to say that we've received confirmation back from the national team that the plans are fulfil what is required. We obviously now need to just make sure that that's delivered and appropriate for the rest of the year. I think given that we are so far into the financial year, the most important bit of the paper in some ways is the reflection on moving forward into 22-23 that's set out in the paper. I think that given the lateness that the guidance and the lateness of the submission date this year, what the group through the Health and Wellbeing Board is doing is trying to get ahead of the game on the 22-23 and starting to work up now what things might look like, so that we're not waiting and we're not dependent on national guidance coming out, although we'll have to be cognizant of that. So I'll leave it there, Chair, and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Jane. So in terms of the Health and Wellbeing Board, Ed, did you have anything to say? It was on Thursday, wasn't
it? Yeah, there was a discussion about the Better Care Fund, which was supported subject to whether colleagues could look at how it's put together in the future. So they wanted to see a greater emphasis upon prevention, investment in prevention. Now, some of it I think is the way it's badged, if I'm honest, but there was a view to kind of review it for the future and to ensure it aligns with the Health and Wellbeing Board's strategy around prevention.
Indeed, there's always probably more that could be done through it. Again, one for future discussions. Okay, any other questions from board members? No, in which case we will receive and approve that. Thank you, Jane. We're going to move on to the governing body assurance framework. Graham, anything to bring to our attention? We normally do this after the integrated performance report, I have to say. Yeah. That's my fault for getting it the wrong way around. I mean, we've obviously had quite a discussion around the Level 4 National Incident Report and the risks that we have within the system as a consequence. Anything that you think we need to consider?
No, I mean, the key points are actually listed there, Mark, in paragraph 2, and it is a regular document that's sort of scrutiny at various committees. So it is just a working document that we use. I don't know if any of the risk holders would like to add anything to their particular risk at this time.
Maybe bring it out in the integrated performance report.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions about the framework? In which case we'll just reviewed it, approve it, continue to review it through our various committees. In which case, shall we move on to the integrated performance report? Paul, did you want to kick us off? As you said, you were.
Yeah, I think Mark, I think you'll notice that what's actually in there at the moment is probably quality finance, and I think there's been a note. Some of the transformation work has been not updated and remains the same. So from a DIG performance, I think I've already said as part of the other paper, the framework in terms of performance. So I open up to my colleagues really in terms of quality in particular. I'm sure, Lisa, sorry to put you on the spot, you may have a view in terms of some of the effect of what we are experiencing from a quality point of view. You may wish to say something.
Sure. So I was just going to give an overview, if that's okay. I won't go through the infection control in much detail because Paul's obviously already referred to it. I would just note that actually our Ipswich Hospital site of ESNEFT has done pretty well managing their outbreaks. They've currently got 3 ward outbreaks, bays closed on other wards, but they have done a really good job in managing their outbreaks, and they have a really good risk assessment process for staff returning to work. So I do feel confident that although we've still got 43 COVID patients in hospital, that they are on top of it, and we oversee the ward outbreaks through infection management team processes which happen weekly. So good sight on that with Paul's team. So the rest of Ipswich, other things going on in Ipswich Hospital, they are currently developing their quality priorities. They've started it slightly differently this time. They have sent a questionnaire to stakeholders and service users to start with co-production and to start with what would our stakeholders and patients like to see in our quality priorities, rather than working from a different way, which is where they work a long list up internally and then ask and then go out to consultation. So that's very welcomed. There has been a trauma network review of Ipswich Hospital in October, which we will be taking to clinical scrutiny, the next clinical scrutiny meeting. Some concerns were raised as part of that network, so we'll review the action plan at clinical scrutiny. I think I would say that maternity still remains a concern, particularly the postpartum hemorrhage rates. At the maternity board, we had sight of ESNEF's continuity of carer plans and their trajectory to get to 100% continuity of carer, which we know would significantly impact on a number of those outcomes if achieved. The trajectory currently looks to complete to 100% middle of 2023. There are some significant risks in there, mainly related to workforce. It all balances on workforce. Although I will say at the regional maternity board, it was really interesting because James Paget are leading the way in the east of England on continuity of care. They are at 86% continuity of carer, which is remarkable, and they've done incredibly well. And actually they have a 0 vacancy rate now for midwives, and they have 16 midwives waiting to join the organisation on a waiting list. So I think that tells a really important story around the leadership and how it can make an impact on workforce and how workforce can respond positively to it. So our trajectory for 100% remains in 2023, but all organisations are still reporting some risk to meeting that trajectory. In the IPR, we've done a children's focus this time around eating disorders, CAMS, ADHD, and you'll note the update on progress around the recovery plans and recruitment. There's some really great news, and there's some news that's obviously still concerns us as a quality team around access into those services. Probably the area that I will just give a bit of attention to is the ambulance trust. So we have seen an increase in SIs through the winter. In November there was 21 serious incidents reported across the east of England, as obviously with a lead commissioner. 16 of those SIs were related to system delays, so where there were significant delays at hospitals in that particular ICS, which impacted on the ability for the ambulance to attend to a patient and impacted on the waiting time, and therefore there is a consequence of serious harm or death. And out of those 21, in November, 16 were related to delays in attendance and conveyance and due to system delays, and in December, out of 21 SIs reported, 13 were related to delays. So as an East of England system, we've introduced a new framework around how we understand the impact across the system and the ultimate consequence on patients, rather than just looking at it from an East perspective. So we have asked all ICSs to really consider, with the ICS as the lead, consider using our new framework, which brings providers together to look at, actually, if this had been different, if we hadn't had these ambulances waiting, you know, in A&E or wherever, then you know, potentially the consequence could have been different. And that's not to apportion blame or to do anything. It's just to ensure that the system has oversight of some of the harm that's happening in the community because of a delay in ambulance response times. Otherwise, the system doesn't understand and doesn't see that. So that's really important. We have the East Regional Quality Meeting this afternoon, and we'll just be asking for assurance from all ICSs that they are taking that forward. The other thing that will also be a key agenda item this afternoon that you will see on the IPR is that East are currently not utilising CPIS, which is the Child Protection Information Service, which raises some concerns around their ability to safeguard children, because that's the communication link around child protection issues. So we will be talking that through with East. Other concerns that are raised through the quality team can continue to be access to dentistry. We do have a great piece of work that somebody from Paul's team, Greg, is leading on, which we're just working with, and will I'm sure give some resolution to the issues that the people of Suffolk face in access to urgent dentistry and specialist dentistry, which is brilliant news. And lastly, just to say that the COVID-19 therapeutic service is up and running. That's the service that ESNEFT is providing, and West Suffolk in the West, which delivers the antibody treatment and the antiviral treatment for people at significant risk of developing severe illness with COVID. So the demand has been really high on that service, obviously with the significant increase in COVID numbers, but we are starting to see it flattening off. But ESNEFT have done it amazingly well with the predictions from the modelling that we had, which were tiny. They've seen much higher numbers, so they've done incredibly well. So thank you to them. Thank you. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Yes, I think the modelling was about 10 or 11 times out, wasn't it? But there you go. That's what they always say. All models are wrong. Ed.
Thanks, Lisa. I mean, thanks for all you're doing. And I think just your update gives us a sense of the breadth of your agenda is just enormous, isn't it? Not just within SNE, but across the East of England. So thank you very much for all you're doing. My question was around the emotional wellbeing hub and the backlog. So it'd be helpful if it's either you or Richard to give an update. So I think the report says we've slipped, and we're asking Bernardo's to help for a little longer. So just some assurance that we are getting through the backlog and that February is a realistic milestone.
Sure, I will let Richard update because he oversees that and he'll have more information than I do. But my team tell me that the red and amber cases are decreasing and there is a better response to them, and that Barnardo's, the implementation of Barnardo's is really helping with the waiting lists in the emotional wellbeing hub, albeit there's still a lot of work to do. But can I hand over to you, Richard, for that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have the detail in front of me, Ed, but I'm happy to get that and talk to you. What I do know is when we met a couple of weeks ago, they are behind trajectory by about 300, but they have come down by over 1,000 in terms of what the overall list was. And as Lisa has said, both the red and ambers are being managed well within their current KPI. Actually, they had no real list at all for red and ambers, as Lisa said last week. There are there's 3 dependencies that we're working through with them. One is that the Barnardo's offer that we are looking to extend. There is a dependency on that, though, to the extent that the current Barnardo's offer, as you recall, is being moved over now into the helpline, which we're due to launch, hopefully soft launch in February. So around 40% of the calls that will be coming in or expect to come into the hub will actually be going through into the Barnardo's helpline for parents and carers, which by its nature will reduce the need for the staffing within the hub, who can then focus more on the backlog. We're asking if Barnardo's could effectively double run, not only do the helpline, but also continue to provide additional capacity for the actual hub as well. But that would mean them obviously increasing their staffing base. That will take some time. So I've deliberately suggested they don't revise the trajectory until we've got this bottomed out, because effectively we'll end up doing it and then it will change again. So I suppose the headline is they are behind where they need to be, or where we hope them to be. There's further mitigations related partly to Barnardo's that the Trust and Barnardo's are looking to take. And then the weekly meeting that is still happening to oversee this is looking for a revised trajectory within the next week to 2 weeks once we've clarified that.
Thank you. A very useful partnership, which has shown some, maybe we need to be thinking a little bit more differently than we have done with this particular service. Any questions for Lisa? Aisha, I don't know whether you have anything further to add from a maternity perspective. One of the questions that we had in our minds was around the continuity of carer and the acceptability of it being an achievable thing within our local trust. Sounds like James Paget have been able to show the positive side of that. So that's very welcome.
Thank you, Mark. I think I'm just impressed what James Paget has done, and I hope we can replicate and deliver even better in our area. But it goes back to workforce, and I think that is the key. And I know in the discussions which Lisa's have with the dorms, that recruitment is in progress. So I think we can aim towards it. I think we should try to achieve it as much as possible. And speaking to the workforce on ground, the local midwives who come to the practices, they are very keen on this as well, and they can see how important it is in delivering high quality and good start to the newborns as well, because I think it all impacts on the well-being of the mums. So yes, I think we're trying our best, but it's down to the workforce, which is the key for every place at this time. I think Lolu's hand is up as well. Maybe she wants to add something as well.
Lolly?
I wasn't going to add to maternity because I agree with Aisha, but I was going to ask the question to Richard about the hub. Because my recollection from when we were talking about the green cases quite a lot last year was that there was a lot of those cases were behavior related cases. So the neurodevelopmental pathway is due to launch, isn't it? So that should help and remove some of that pressure off of the green, that green category that does tend to be the biggest contributor to the green pathway.
Yeah, exactly that. I should have mentioned not only are Barnardo's providing in the pilot we agreed for a year, the helpline, they're also providing the neurodevelopmental coordination function. So they've already been supporting, as you're alluding to, Lolu, a proportion of the green waiting list of actually are either expected neuro-related, which could be a whole spectrum of different issues, that we absolutely feel it's better placed that Bernardo support that client group. And we're bringing a full update to the executive in February to do a deep dive on neurodevelopmental, given, as you said, we're launching the whole model imminently, which I think will have a positive impact upon that. I think there's still more work to do, and we're picking up with the trust next week around attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, waiting list, because even though we've got this work happening, there is still, we're not unique, we've got the same challenges in Essex as well. There are challenges with the waiting list related to those who are waiting for an actual diagnosis, even once they've gone through the pre-work with voluntary sector and others.
Thank you.
Thanks. And just coming back to East, and you know, I totally understand that you know, it's the impact of how the system and the processes within the system and how much of that is in control of an ambulance crew. I think that, and I've called for this for a number of years now, around halos, and I think the people who see this, where the systemic failures are halos, and that we should be encouraging them being able to work with our EDs particularly, and the crews, around what is acceptable or what is not going right, and record it firsthand so that it can be worked on. You know, spoken about it being a Kaizen way of working, that I think halos have got a great place in which they could be helping the system improve whilst doing the work that they do. And the nature of a halo is usually an experienced member of an ambulance service who hopefully would be able to operate with a bit of authority. Any other questions for Lisa? In which case, shall we move on? Are we doing finance or transformation next? I can never remember.
I don't mind giving a few headlines, but I think, as Paul said, just to explain, we took a decision internally that, given a number of staff had been relocated on to other priorities in the last reporting period, that we didn't do formal reporting of the programmes. That was in line with NHS England guidance around stepping down non-urgent activities related to the response. Having said that, I think we've covered some of the ground in Paul's previous updates around some of the additional work we've been doing over the last month or so since the last highlight reports. Probably easier, Mark, to take any questions related to if any issues or programmes that colleagues wanted an update on. The only thing just to flag is we did get the planning guidance on Boxing Day, so not Christmas Eve, Boxing Day this year, which was a thrilling read for some of us, not on Boxing Day, I'll admit that. So we're in the process of now developing our response to the planning guidance. So we've got a fortnightly planning group meeting amongst all the different teams that I'm chairing, and we're in the process of cranking the machine up again to go through a further round of planning. So we'll be bringing that through to the executive in terms of our detailed responses to that, probably in March. Once the timeline is March the 17th for drafts, end of April for final. My headline message would be, it's not hugely dissimilar actually to what Paul went through earlier, actually, in planning guidance for 2022, insofar as it's predominantly still the response mode to the ongoing COVID-19 challenges that we're experiencing. There's not really much mention of the long-term plan or strategy more broadly, but just to assuage any concerns, that doesn't mean we're not doing it, because I think we need to carry on through our alliances and through our programmes. So we're now in the process of refreshing those programmes for 22-23 to take account of planning guidance, but to be honest, also continue with our own ambitions locally around what we would like to achieve over the coming year.
Thanks, Richard. And I think it's absolutely imperative that we deploy the strategies we've got in the response. And actually, in the first wave, we saw an acceleration of the delivery against some of our strategies rather than a hindrance to it. So, I think we should be deliberate in that. I'd like to just offer two other things. One is the linked data sets that we need to get our heads around from not only a transformation perspective, but also from a planning and opportunity perspective. And a lot of we have got a linked data set like no other, that we really need to start looking at considering how do we use that in a transformation perspective, alongside personalisation, which is coming through from Lou Hardwick and Dean, as well, in terms of delivering the new cultural approach to transformation and new ways of working. Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Just to say, which is absolutely correct, there are no great surprises in the planning guidance, but what I would echo is we will not even achieve that level of ambition without collaboration and be mindful of our workforce, because I think the ask is quite ambitious even within that narrow definition of the planning guidance.
Absolutely, all very big upstream things that we've just got to get our heads around. In which case, shall we move on to finance then, Jane?
Yes, thank you. So moving on to the short finance report that's included in the pack, we are reporting the position at the end of month 9, so at the end of December. And I'm pleased to say that overall it's a positive financial position. We are showing that we have spent 1.7 million more than our allocated resources. However, that difference will be topped up through a combination of the hospital discharge programme and the elective recovery fund, which has been flowing through separate national funding streams during the year. We had our Finance and Performance Committee last week, and we went through in detail this report and the individual elements in there, but the second page does cover the main variances that are in the plan. The Finance Committee has asked for more details on prescribing, which has been quite a budget under pressure this year, and we also continue to look in detail at continuing healthcare, which particularly in the first part of the year showed particular pressures, but I'm pleased to say that has now stabilised. So that's all I was going to say on the current year. We are anticipating that that trend will continue to the end of the year. So moving on to 22-23, Richard stole my thunder talking about the planning guidance, but we are working through the financial elements of that. We're awaiting the final confirmation of our allocations for next year, but the drafts that we've seen look as though it will be a very similar position to this year, with a few changes to the overall funding regime. A few things will disappear next year, particularly the hospital discharge programme, but they will be replaced by other new funding streams. So we're awaiting the final details so that we can work through that, both within the CCG and as collectively as CCGs on behalf of the system. I think it's fair to say that that's going to be quite a tight overall funding scenarios for the CCGs, so we will need to work with system partners to look at the overall resources available and just make sure that they've been, as we move into the ICB, that they've been distributed in a way which ensures that all elements of the system can live within the resources available.
Thanks, Jane. And any questions for Jane on that from colleagues? No. Maddie?
It was just to add, perhaps specifically from a primary care perspective, beyond medicines, as Jane's mentioned, but specifically also within that, it's about our estates and budgets and the associated challenges with that. So I think it's a well-known challenge to Amanda, Jane and I, certainly in Ipswich and East Suffolk, and to the practices. So over the course of the next period, I know there's a paper going to the Integrated Care Programme Board to explain the challenges that we have, but it really is something that financially we're going to have to look at how we can mitigate and manage over the coming period, because there's huge pressure on the estate from the growing workforce and the growing population, both of which are good. We just need to be able to respond to that. So it's just to note that that is work that's going on.
A very important note, and particularly, you know, if we want to grow our own workforce, that means training them and being able to accommodate them. And we know that if we avoid growing our workforce, we just find ourselves at the end of the line. So it's a bit of a catch-22 situation there, but one that we can't afford any longer. Thank you. Any other comments? In which case, shall we move on to Freedom of Information report, Amanda?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chair. So this is our typical report that I bring to the board a couple of times a year. The report details all the requests that we've had, bringing us up to the end of December last year. We have seen a very slight reduction in the number of requests that we have on average received, and they are around 20 per month. About a year ago, we were seeing upwards of around 30, but I think the pandemic may have been one contributor. But in terms of any pattern, there really isn't, Chair. It's just generic type of information that we continue to be asked. And as we have done for a number of months now, any response that we offer is updated on our log, which is then published on our website for ease of access to members of the public. So really 20 on average, nothing untoward, but we do continue to respond and within the 20 working days. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments on that? Observations? I suppose my common observation is what have we learned from it? Have we taken anything out of this? And I'm not sure that we have up to date, other than it being a required function of the CCG to respond.
Indeed.
Okay, in which case, shall we move on to the minutes of the meetings, which are laid out for us to receive and endorse? Did anyone have any questions about them? No, in which case we'll receive and endorse them. So that brings us to the end of our agenda. The date and time of the next meeting will be Tuesday, the 22nd of March at, well, it says 9 o'clock. We normally start at 9:15. Do we have any understanding of whether we'll be meeting in public, in real rather than virtual by that time? No? Lisa?
I mean, it's difficult to know what any IPC guidance will have at that time. There possibly may be no reason from a transmission rate why, as long as we're in a good sized room and are sensible, that we couldn't meet in public. I guess the bigger question is around the virtual world and whether it makes life easier for people and public to join in this way. But from an infection control and transmission of COVID reason, unless things drastically change, and we'd have to have the ability to be able to move to virtual if we needed to, as long as we felt comfortable in a large enough room, then we should be able to meet face to face.
So yeah, we'll wait and see then. Okay, so time to move on to questions from the public. We've been notified of a number before the meeting. Have any other ones come through subsequently?
No other questions.
No. Sorry, Simon. No, I haven't received any.
Okay, in which case, Simon, do you want to help take us through the questions that we have?
Yes, of course. So the questions that we've received have come from Mr. Anthony Dooley of the Unite Union. He asks 4 questions. The first question is as follows. Can Ed, who is the CCG representative on and indeed vice chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board, explain to the meeting why he agreed to endorse the unconfirmed minutes of the November meeting of the Health and Wellbeing Board, when the section that referred to my statement was not a true and accurate record of what took place? This despite me asking the board, before those minutes were considered, for them to be amended so that they would be a true and accurate record. My question is asked in the context of the accountability element within the 7 Nolan principles of behaviour in public life.
Ed?
Yeah, sure. So obviously the minutes were signed off unanimously by the board. Having read them through this morning more carefully in light of the question, the minutes don't record the fact that the chairman asked Mr. Dooley to leave the meeting due to what he saw as the use of foul language that was disrespectful to the board. That isn't recorded in the minutes, and I think Suffolk County Council have said if Mr. Dooley would like to make a complaint about that action not being recorded in the minutes, there is a process to follow, and I know that they've shared a link with him to do so. I personally have no issue with the minutes being updated if that is required.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Next question, Simon. Thanks.
Yeah, the second question then from Anthony Dooley is as follows. What is the meeting's response to the chaos in educational establishments caused by the government's policies towards that sector, resulting even before Mr. Sahawi's diktat that students in secondary schools are not required to wear face masks in classrooms, that there were 2,477 COVID-19 cases among students in the second week of this term, up 64% on week 1, affecting 341 establishments in Suffolk. The background being the failure of government to put in place a range of mitigating measures to reduce the risk of coronavirus transmission, including not providing the offer of vaccinations to those under 11, as has happened in the USA and Italy, for example. Do you agree that the policy of vaccination only, as an extremely important as it has been, is inadequate as a policy to reduce infection, as that data now shows? The fact that over 120 children have died in this country demonstrates that Omicron is not a mild disease. Or do you agree with Jenny Harries, who said last summer that children would be more likely to be run over by a bus than catch COVID-19 at a time when those mitigations could and should have been in place in all educational establishments? Your constant reference to following national guidance has shown that you as a system have failed many young people. So would you care to apologise to them and their parents and grandparents, and indeed the wider community? But as important, what is your learning, and what are you going to say and do differently now and in the future?
Where to start with that question? When there's issues around infection prevention and control, there's things that we aren't able to influence. Lisa, anything about infection prevention and control? There was a question around vaccination in under 11s, but wider than that as well.
Well, so obviously the guidance that goes to schools is part of the government's guidance, and we have limited ability to really impact or influence that. We work really closely with the health protection team in public health and our schooling system and the local authority around infection control guidance and supporting education on how to maximise what we call the hierarchy of controls in environments, so making sure that their space is they're utilising their space properly, ventilation, all those things that we would do to mitigate the risk of COVID. So yes, so really from a health perspective, our input into that sector is to support and advise following the guidance that has been issued around the under 11 vaccination programme. So obviously that's a programme that we are now developing. We're waiting for final guidance around the 5 to 11 programme, but yes, so watch this space, Mr. Dooley.
Okay, thank you. Shall we move on to question 3?
Question 3 then is as follows. In your papers today, reference is made to various groups in the context of health inequality, one being the gypsy and traveller community. What prospect for addressing health inequality for them do you anticipate if a government bill currently going through Parliament passes into law and thereby criminalises their way of life?
Is anyone aware of that government bill? Lisa?
I'm really sorry, I don't know about the government bill, but just as an example, I know Mr. Dooley is often interested in the work we're doing on maternity. So we have an advocate working with the Roma community in Ipswich and East Suffolk, because health inequalities in pregnancy and childbirth within that community can be really significant. So we have an advocate working as part of our midwifery team, working with the community, and we are just about at the next maternity board going to evaluate that project and look at future funding to be able to substantiate that piece of work.
Thanks. Anything else from anyone else? Maddie?
I would just add, perhaps, and Fanwell might like to come in here as well, but we have a joint post colleague who has been working with the community in terms of providing information and support to access vaccination. And that work is scheduled to continue. So it started more broadly and generally around health and well-being issues, but also has been dedicated to vaccination in recent weeks.
Thanks, Lisa. Manuel, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that point, that we are, trying as much as we can to get deeper into communities and try and establish, particularly for those, because as you all know, we've been doing this work around inequalities and also around, some of our communities who are not taking up the vaccination. But now what we're doing is to identify those pockets and actually, developing relationships within those communities and building onto that to try and sort of ensure that whatever issues are remaining for those people who have not been vaccinated are addressed, not just on a sort of community group basis, but in instances on individual basis as well.
Thank you. So shall we go on to question 4?
In question 4 is the fourth and final one from Mr. Dooley. So he asks, I wonder if the meeting could respond with evidence on the situation locally with regard to the first item in the Health Service Journal. Namely, is there local evidence which shows poorer and ethnic minority patients wait longer for NHS care?
Anyone want to respond to that? Ed?
So SNF have done some analysis of their waiting list, which actually shows the emphasis upon poorer communities waiting longer rather than ethnic minority communities in their catchment. It may be different in different trusts. So certainly within our system, we are taking that data very seriously and reviewing it, which I think was the concern that other systems weren't doing the same. Elsewhere in the country in that HSJ article. As for the issue itself, I think 1974, Julian Tudor Knight published an academic article about the inverse care law, which is precisely the issue at hand. So this isn't a new issue, unfortunately. It's not saying it's right. absolutely wrong. But this issue has been pervading the health service for many decades. We are looking to reverse that in terms of elective care. We're putting a community diagnostic hub in Clacton, which is the most deprived area of the country, and we're looking at similar in Ipswich as well. So we're aware of the issue, Mr. Dooley. Thank you for raising it. But it's a very deep-seated and long-standing one.
The other area where I again was really heartened to see our ESNEFT team take an interest was in the prioritisation of patients who we know get the worst health outcomes, those with learning disability and with serious mental illness, and ensuring that there is a methodology where they are on elective waiting lists, that a prioritisation is given, and that it isn't just a dogmatic approach to your position in terms of time on the waiting list. You know, I think that's an excellent example of where we can work much more collaboratively on ensuring those who deserve to get better get some priority. Thanks. Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. The only thing I would add to that is early sight of the planning guidance technical that I've seen suggests that health inequalities is going to be a major feature of elective recovery, with a mandate of boards having to see the visibility of the data and the action they need to take to address that issue going forward. So again, it's watch that space. I think there's a lot more work to be done.
Yes, and that is welcome, that emphasis is being given, and that being able to move away from, as I say, dogmatic positions about who gets what when is a good thing. Great. Okay, so we've come to the end of the questions. So I'm going to call the meeting to a close. We do have a private session, and as we had no break, can I give you 7 minutes